good afternoon, everyone. It's a very warm welcome to all the speakers, panelists, and participants joining us here today. On behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this launch event of the report, Bridging the Gender Gap, Skilling, Policy Incentives, and Entrepreneurial Pathways for Empowering Women in Green Transitions. My name is Jochen Lukschat. I'm the director of the New Delhi office of Heinrich Böll Foundation. We are very grateful to the team at iFOREST for their thoughtful research and for the collaboration that made this work possible. Across the world, the transition to a low-carbon economy is accelerating. Countries are investing in renewable energy, electricity, mobility, sustainable manufacturing, and circular economy solutions. These shifts are not only transforming energy systems, they are also reshaping our labor markets, industrial strategy, and development pathways. The ongoing transformation also raises critical questions. Who participates in the transition and who stands to benefit from it? Experience from many countries shows that economic transitions are never neutral. Existing inequalities, whether related to gender, class, geography, or access to education, often shape who is able to access the new opportunities that are emerging. Without deliberate attention to inclusion, emerging sectors can replicate the same structural barriers that have long limited women's participation in technical and high-growth industries. For us as Heinrich Böll Foundation, this is why the concept of a just transition is also an important one. Climate action must go hand in hand with equal opportunity. A sustainable economy should not only reduce emissions, it should also expand access to decent work, livelihoods, and ensure that historically excluded groups are able to participate in and shape the transformation. India's green transition is particularly significant in this regard. With ambitious renewable energy targets, expanding green industries, and a rapidly evolving skills ecosystem, the country is entering a phase where new economic opportunities are emerging across multiple sectors. At the same time, these opportunities intersect with existing labor market inequalities, especially in access to technical education, employment pathways, and entrepreneurship. This is where the report we are launching here today makes an important contribution. By focusing on the state of Odisha, the study provides a grounded understanding of how gender, skill systems, and economic transitions interact at the sub-national level. Odisha is an especially relevant case. It's a mineral-rich state, but also climate vulnerable, and is simultaneously navigating industrial restructuring, energy transition, and livelihood diversification. The research therefore looks not only at opportunities emerging from the green transition, but also at the institutional ecosystems, skilling systems, entrepreneurship platforms, and policy frameworks that shape whether women are able to access these emerging and new opportunities. What is particularly valuable about the report is that it brings together multiple perspectives: labor market data, institutional analysis, insights from trainees, entrepreneurs, and policymakers who've been interviewed. This helps move the conversation beyond broad narratives about green jobs towards a deeper understanding how systems actually function on the ground. Today's webinar is therefore an opportunity not to only launch the report, but also to start a broader dialogue on how India's green transition can become more inclusive and gender responsive. We hope that the discussion today will help identify practical pathways, whether in policy design, institutional collaboration, or program implementation, that can strengthen women's participation in emerging sectors in the state of Odisha and beyond. Let me conclude by once again thanking iFOREST and the team there for their excellent work, and all the distinguished speakers who have joined us today. I look forward to a rich discussion and to continued engagement on advancing gender-transformative pathways to a just transition in India. So thank you very much, and I hand over to the colleagues at iFOREST.
Thank you very much, Johan, for the introduction and and very kind words. And I sincerely thank HBF, for the support in undertaking this research. But I must say, it is not just this report, but all the earlier supports that that has been extended to work on just transition, and with a very specific niche area, which is on gender. Now. I welcome everyone who has joined today afternoon. Just 2 days back, we had the International Women's Day, and there has been a lot of discussion on various dimensions of gender. But one of the core dimensions, in fact, has been how women can be made part of the changing technology landscape, changing workforce dimensions, changing employment patterns. That has not just been influenced by the energy transition, but in fact also by artificial technology. And I think these all are, in fact, the energy transition itself has also been shaped by AI in many ways now. So I think this is a timely conversation, and my hope is that today we will share the report, the study that my colleagues have undertaken, and I congratulate all of them. Suhail Mir, who is leading the Green Jobs program at iFOREST, my colleague Surbhi Nayak, who has extensively worked on the report and who is in fact had led a lot of the Odisha case study. And of course, Nikita, she is not here today. Her final dissertation defense is there, but I wish she could join us, who has also worked very closely on the report, undertaking the analysis and many of the discussions that we had with local communities. But I think what is more important is Odisha is just one case study. The reason we looked into Odisha in the context of this, where gender discourse is placed in the transition pathway, is because I think two things are very important. Number one is that Odisha is a state which is called the East of India. It's people are drawing parallel to Maharashtra right now, considering that the state has about 44% of the state's GDP relied on industrial sectors, and it is projected to grow further. Many of these industries will be green industries. Secondly, the state, it's among the iconic Eastern India states, which has put 11 gigawatt of renewable energy target in the coming years. And they are not just renewable energy, there are many things that have been happening in the state. And the third thing is, it is also today India's top coal mining states, and also one of the major power producers, particularly if we look at captive power production. So Odisha, the duality is that Odisha is it's one of India's top fossil fuel dependent states, heavily industrializing, needs an energy transition, but at the same time, Odisha has issues of climate change. There are challenges of marginalized population. There are issues of women participation in the state. And most importantly, the state has taken some fantastic initiatives, unlike many other states of India, such as developing a World Skills Center, or those of you know the state's landscape, Odisha has one of the strongest women's self-help group programs under Mission Shakti, which in fact not just talks of women skilling and all, but Mission Shakti is more about women entrepreneurship. And Odisha has, I must say, one of the most successful programs in Eastern India in this region. So Odisha gave us the perfect landscape to understand the gender transition challenge within the energy transition landscape in its entirety. And my colleagues will therefore present too. It's not just about skilling, but it is also about how women's participation can be strengthened through entrepreneurship, through skilling. And of course, the scope of the report was not that, but I think the conversations with our esteemed panelists will also lead to something which I believe is very important, is the fundamental role that education has to play to create actually the foundation even for a woman to go and participate in a skilling program or to take up entrepreneurship and develop a business on their own. With that, and I must say one more statistics, which is very interesting. that Odisha has a projected green jobs target growth projections at least 10 lakh jobs in the next 10 years. And therefore, it is a right ecosystem. It is, and green jobs does not mean only renewable energy jobs or green industry jobs. It is also a lot of work, and entrepreneurship is around nature-based solutions. The state is endowed with forest-based resources, value-added agriculture. Many things can happen, and therefore it really provides a very timely intervention point to see that as Odisha plans this transition in the next 10 years, as it strengthens its skilling ecosystem, the programs like Mission Shakti, in fact, it's a department now. How do we really plan it? I'll stop to that. My colleague will do a brief presentation. Surbi will do the presentation on behalf of iFOREST, and then my colleague Suhail, who will today conduct the panel discussion. And I request all of our guests today, if you have any question, please type it in the Q&A box. We will try to respond to all of your questions through our panelists and whatever is in the scope of HBF and iFOREST to respond to. And with that, I'll stop here. I'm handing over the floor to my colleague Surbi. And thank you very much and welcome once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shrishta. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining this webinar. Abhishek, could you please share the screen? So today, as my colleague Shrishta mentioned, I'm going to present the findings from our study, which is Bridging the Gender Gap, and where we try to look at the gender gaps in green skilling, jobs, and entrepreneurship by taking a case study from Odisha. Can you, Abhishek, can you please put it in full screen? So let me start the presentation with a very challenging question. So as Shrishta, my colleague, has mentioned, by 2030, Odisha's green transition could potentially create about 10 lakh new jobs across sectors like renewable energy, EVs, and green manufacturing. But here is a very important question that we through this study try to probe is who will fill these jobs? Today, women represent less than quarter of technical trainees and an even smaller share in emerging green sector. And it's very clear that if we do not act intentionally, the green transition could reproduce existing gender inequalities instead of reducing them. So the real challenge is not only creating green jobs, it is ensuring women are part of building the green economy. Abhishek, can you please share the screen? Okay. So as India and states like Odisha move toward low carbon development, the green transition is creating new industries, jobs, and economic opportunities. And as I have pointed out before, will women benefit from this transition or the existing inequalities will depend? That is a pressing challenge right in front of us. So basically, this particular green transition shift is transforming the sectors, the industries, and creating demand for new skills and green jobs. However, the transition of this scale can only can have a very positive impact on restructuring the existing labor market in ways that can, in fact, gives us the opportunity to reduce the existing inequalities, but on the other hand, can also reproduce the existing inequalities. So without deliberate policy action, women and other marginalized groups may face barriers in accessing these emerging opportunities, and that is why it is very important to integrate gender consideration into green transition strategies. Next slide, please. So women continue to face structural barriers in labor markets. Uh, as we have very extensively looked at the NSSO data as well, we see that they remain underrepresented in technical sectors, particularly in energy, engineering, and various other industrial jobs. At the same time, women often carry a disproportionate share of informal work, unpaid family labor, and care responsibilities. These structural realities mean that when new economic opportunities emerge, women may not automatically benefit from them. Therefore, a gender-responsive approach is essential to ensure that the green transition becomes inclusive and equitable. Next slide, please. So this study basically aims to operationalize the idea of a gender transformative just transition at the state level. Specifically, the research focuses on four objectives. First, to map the gender dimensions of Odisha's existing skilling and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Second, to examine women's participation in green skills training and emerging sectors and enterprises. Third, to identify the barriers and enabling factors that influence women's engagement in the green economy. And finally, to develop policy recommendations that can strengthen women-led pathways in Odisha's green transition. Next slide, please. So this study has combined both secondary and primary research. On the secondary side, we analyzed policy frameworks, government data sets, and industrial projections related to green sectors and employment. Whereas on the primary side, we conducted extensive field research, which included 637 trainees survey, interviews with skilling institutions and employers, specifically from solar and EV sector, and then 8 focus group discussions with 110 women entrepreneurs, primarily from the self-help groups. So these insights have helped us not only to understand the policy gaps, but also the ground realities faced by women who are trying to enter green sectors. Next slide, please. So Odisha is at a very important moment in its development trajectory. As Shrestha, my colleague, has already mentioned, Odisha has a very strong industrial base, abundant natural resources, and in fact, for the last couple of years, we have also observed that there is increasing trend of renewable energy and green infrastructure investment. And our analysis drawing on CEW estimates and EPICOL data shows that Odisha's green transition could create up to 10 lakh jobs by 2030. This represents a major opportunity for economic growth. However, realizing this potential will also require rapid expansion of green skills and workforce training systems. Next slide, please. So the next question comes where these new green jobs would be created or where these jobs will come from. So this majority of green jobs are expected to emerge from renewable energy and storage, bioenergy, circular economy activities, nature-based solutions, which have a very large long-term job potential. And in addition to that, emerging manufacturing sectors such as EVs, battery production, and green hydrogen will create significant new employment opportunities. And overall, as I pointed out earlier, these sectors together could generate around 10 lakh jobs by 2030. So again, the question is who will fill these jobs? So looking at the status of women in Odisha's labor market, Odisha actually performs relatively well in terms of female labor force participation compared to the national average. if you look at the PLFS data. However, the nature, when we do a kind of deep dive into it, the nature of women's employment remains a major concern. Nearly 70% of working women are concentrated in agriculture, often in low productivity or informal roles. Women's participation in industry and services is also significantly lower. This sectoral concentration limits women's ability to move into higher value emerging sectors, including those linked to the green economy. And in many of the academic discussions, we do also find that there is a trend of feminization of the informal labor, which is also true for Odisha's labor market. Next slide, please. One of the biggest barriers that we observe through our analysis and extensive field research is women's participation in new sectors, which is the skills gap. Our analysis shows that more than 75% of women lack vocational training. There is no proper formal vocational training. In addition, women face lower access to technical and STEM education, which are essential for entering green industries. Without targeted interventions in the skill ecosystem, again, entering into the jobs or even starting a green enterprise, it becomes extremely restricted and exclusionary for women. Next slide, please. And even within the formal training system, we observe that women remain extremely underrepresented, whereas we found women make up less than 25% of trainees in ITIs. More strikingly, only 6% of trainees are enrolled in green-related courses. Within that small group, women represent only 1/4 of the participant, and this trend particularly suggests that green skilling, although has marginally expanded, it has replicated the existing gender segregation in the technical training. Next slide, please. Abhishek, next slide. Yeah, here. So interestingly, our research also found that, of course, there are key structural barriers to green training or green skilling. However, social norms, which are often talked about, are not the primary barrier. So instead, the main challenges were related to information and institutional gap. Many women reported uncertainty about job prospects after completing green skilling training. Other highlighted limited availability of local courses, weak exposure to industry opportunity, and concerns around safety and mobility. This suggests that improving career guidance, industry linkages, and training access could significantly increase women's participation. And these structural barriers are in fact are the major blockers for women's participation in green skilling. Next slide, please. Yeah. So when we try to also look at the entrepreneurship landscape, we observe that although women's entrepreneurship in Odisha is relatively widespread, however, and we did find that around 1 in 5 MSMEs are women-owned. However, most of these enterprises remain micro-scale and informal, often concentrated in low-value activities. Many women entrepreneurs operate within household-based enterprises or SST structures. As a result, while participation is high, economic returns and growth potential remains very limited. Next slide, please. As my colleague has already pointed out, and very rightly so, SSG self-help groups play a critical role in enabling women's economic participation, and Odisha is one of the leading examples of that. Many women entrepreneurs engage in activities from our FGT. We found that mushroom cultivation, agro processing, handicrafts, and eco products. These initiatives provide important livelihood support to them. However, many self-help groups face barriers in scaling up these businesses. Challenges such as limited market access, infrastructure gaps, insufficient exposure to higher value green enterprise opportunities are basically limiting the scaling up of their businesses. And this represents a missed opportunity, I would say, for building women-led green value chain. So now the question is, what do women entrepreneurs need? So when we asked women entrepreneurs about the support they need most, three priorities clearly emerged. First and foremost, access to funding or interest-free loans. Second, assured procurement opportunities through government or in institutional or industrial buyers. And third, mentorship and business development support. Many of them even lack minimum information or knowledge about the emerging new green sectors or enterprises, and in fact, creating these networks through SSG would be a very critical point. So these interventions not only will ensure that women-led enterprises scale up, but also move beyond earning or move beyond the subsistence level enterprises. Next slide, please. So the central insight from our study is that women risk being left out of Odisha's green economy. This is not due to lack of aspirations or capability, but rather, or even the most important factors would be the structural gaps, that is in skill ecosystem, labor market pathways, or enterprise ecosystems. Therefore, policy responses should go beyond simply promoting participation. Next slide, please. So this is a brief snapshot of our core findings. And this clearly shows that if active support by addressing the skill gap, increasing their participation, retention, and access to green jobs, or even scaling up of the entrepreneurship opportunities are provided, along with strong institutional support, then women's participation or integration into green value chains and leadership in green enterprises can definitely be a fundamental pillar of green economies development in Odisha. So based on our analysis, we have arrived at around 5 key strategic priorities, which are: first is to establish a state's green skill mission with explicit gender target. Second, expanding women's participation in emerging green industrial sectors. Third, supporting the growth of women-led green MSMEs. Fourth, strengthening or enabling the ecosystem through care, support, infrastructure, and safe mobility. And finally, building gender-responsive monitoring and data system to track the progress. And I would also urge all the panelists to reflect on these priorities as they will be expanding and discussing more from their own experience and research findings. So to conclude, I would like to say here that the green transition represents one of the largest economic transformation of our time. For states like Odisha, it offers an opportunity to create millions of new jobs and industries. However, without intentional policy design, these opportunities may not reach everyone equally. A gender responsive, in fact, a gender transformative approach is therefore very essential by investing in women's skills, access to jobs, enterprises, and leadership. Odisha can build a truly inclusive and just transition. And I just wanted to also conclude by saying that ultimately a transition cannot be called just if half of the workforce is left behind. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion. Over to you, Sohail.
Thank you, Survi, for the wonderful presentation. And moving on to our next session, which will be a very deep dive from our panelists and guests who have joined us today. Let me take a minute before we proceed on the panel discussion to welcome our panelists today for this particular report. We have with us today Sona Mitraji, who is the Senior Advisor, Institute for What Works to Advance Gender Equality. We have with us Sabina Devanji, President and Executive Director, Just Jobs Network. We have with us Kamya Chaudhary, Research Fellow, Chatham House. Our last, I think, one of the panelists could not join yet, and Shubhanga Kishore Dasji, Deputy Director, World Skill Center. Thank you so much for taking the time today and join us on this important discussion, which is, of course, we know what is happening in the traditional sectors, given the STEM education and everything, when it comes to women inclusion, participation, and inequality of the opportunity itself. This is a segment wherein it's in the early stages, wherein we should put our focus and have policies, guidelines in place, whether it is government, whether it is private sector, whether it is the industry itself, to have those nuances in their practices so that it becomes more inclusive for each one of us. For the panel, before we move on to the questions and discussions, deliberations, I would quickly want to highlight how we will proceed on this. We will have 2 rounds of discussions on maybe key questions, guiding questions for all of us. And we will take maybe 5 minutes on each question and the response, of course, from our panelists. Then we will have another round of the discussion with all our panelists. And lastly, we will have questions from every one of us who has joined us today. You can put your questions on the link, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question, but please raise your hand, introduce yourself at the last session of this panel discussion. Let me start with Sona Mitraji. As someone who has extensively worked on gender and labor statistics, particularly in India, I would want to know what are the 2-3 critical barriers that still continue to limit women's participation in India's labor market. And the proceeding part of the question, how are these constraints being reproduced within the emerging green skills and jobs? Which, of course, is risking a transition that reinforces gender inequality rather than enabling a truly gender-just energy future. So your reflections on that, please.
Thank you. Hello to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to iFOREST, and thanks to HBO for hosting this. And thanks, Sunil, for the questions, and Surabhi for inviting me to the panel. I think the present, and congratulations to the team for this excellent study that you've done for Odisha, so relevant and important at this moment. And in fact, when you ask me these questions, a lot of it that has already been reflected in your findings are the things that one would speak of as as one of the major barriers. Yet I'm going to talk about one of the most important things that I think we need to start talking about again, is basically that women are actually concentrated in some specific segments of every industry and sector possible, and which is what, and that there's a term for that. It is called the gender-based occupational segregation, which is basically something that keeps women concentrated and cohorted into, low paid, unskilled, low skilled, low value added segments of any of the value chains in any of the sectors and industries that we talk about. I think that is one of the most important barriers that we need to talk about in the context when we say that women's labor force participation has actually increased in the last 2 years. That is what the government data tells us. Yet we find that women are increasingly working in agriculture. They are not being able to come out into the newer opportunities that are being created in the whole idea of future of work. Within the future of work, we have the green jobs, we have the jobs, the digital economy, the emerging jobs, and we find women again getting clustered into the lower ends of the value chain. In the context of green jobs, we see women concentrated in large parts as solar installers, solar panel installers. We do not see them as engineers. We do not see them as technical specialists. We do not really see them anywhere in the higher rungs of the value chain. What we see is we find them and we find some of them. The big plants of renewable energy generation or hydrogen plants or the plants, sector segments that the presentation was also talking about. We don't see a lot of women in as plant operators as well within those segments or within those factories. And therefore and the reason why we don't see them, one of the things that's come as a very striking factor is that the manufacturing plants or the factory operation setup do not have conducive environment for having women or absorbing women into that. Now, one thing that always comes up is women are not skilled enough. But even when they are skilled, the infrastructure doesn't provide them enough facilities that women need in terms of the care infrastructure that is supplementary, that has to be supplementary and complementary to the entire manufacturing setup, and that is absent. It is only present in these cohorts where women are used to work, like garments, like textiles, like electronics. So there has to be a replication of this kind of structural, institutional care infrastructure embedded within the newer manufacturing processes within renewable energy jobs or the green jobs that we are talking about. That's one, and that is required not only for women factory workers, but it is also important for women specialists, technical specialists and engineers who are aspiring and being trained to work in these operations. So I think that is care infrastructure is something that is important to be embedded within the entire idea of creating newer forms of jobs. That's one of the important barriers. And the second is to remove these occupational segregation. The skilling programs will only be successful when we have these added components of care and safety at workplace, because that is another thing that that repeatedly comes up, that factory sweatshops or factory floors are not really the safest workplaces that women are used to. It may be safe, but there is a lack of confidence and trust. And I'm going to just give one example and stop here, is that 4 years ago, Mission Shakti was evaluated by iWage and Inclusion Economics together, and in Odisha for the pipeline of garment workers, where Odisha was skilling girls, young girls, to work in the garment factory floors in Karnataka. They completed trainings, but they were never sent to Karnataka because the parents did not have confidence. The factory workflow was not taken as something that is a safe workplace for their girls and daughters. So what happened was Shahi export was actually brought back to Orissa from Karnataka, and it was then that the chain of training, apprenticeship, and getting into the factory floor happened. So there are also these locational things, but the perception of safety, the confidence of women workers, and the parents of young girls are very important. Unless we provide these provide enough safety precautions for women and girls to start working in these newer manufacturing sectors where it is traditionally male dominated, we will not have this occupational segregation being broken. And of course, care is one of the most important things that has to be embedded. I'll stop here since we have 5 minutes. So yeah.
Yeah, Thank you so much. I think this is what we have observed from the ground as well. These are the ground realities. For example, we covered around 100 worker survey with the EPC, solar and EV sector. Particularly in the solar sector, we just saw 2 women who were working in the HR section. And the major reason was one, of course, the bias from the employer itself, that if we want to send them, these are mostly on-site jobs when it comes to solar, renewables, or green
Yes.
hydrogen or EV. And one was that they don't want to. I don't know how true is that. But second, immediately was you need to have that infrastructure there. You need to have separate washrooms. You need to have those bifurcations in the infrastructure so that women feel safe in the workplace. So there are many examples such as this, which we have observed in the field. And we will discuss more once we proceed on this discussion. Our next panelist, Sabina Devanji. My question to you, ma'am, is what is the present status of women's representation? By representation, I mean participation, retention, and of course, job access in the current skilling ecosystem, considering Odisha as a market for this segment. And what are the emerging opportunities for mandating measurable representation and retention targets in these high-tech green skill courses? So from the participation point of view, what are the incentives, or what are the maybe some policy incentives which should be there, which will mandate it to make it more successful in terms of gender participation?
Great. Thank you so much, Sohail. And of course, thank you to iFOREST for the invitation to be here today. And a big congratulations to iFOREST and particularly Sohail, Surabhi, and Nikita on such an important and thorough report. I really enjoyed going through it. So I have a lot of things to say, but I only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to streamline as much as possible. You know, I think the first question that I'd like to start with is which women are we talking about, right? Surabhi's already laid out some of the data, but really quickly, nearly half, right? 1 out of every 2 women in Odisha are not in the labor market at all. Female labor force participation is just under 38% relative to 67% for men. And yes, this is better than the national average, which is 29%, so significantly better. But as Surabhi also asked, what are these women that are in the labor market actually doing? And 72% of them are actually self-employed, mostly in subsistence agriculture, right? And this is way above the national average of 68%. So another really important statistic, I think, is that only 4% of women are in formal, regular work in Odisha. So why am I repeating these numbers or adding to these numbers? Because I think the first question that we need to start with is, who are we actually talking about? When these women are thinking about entering the labor market, trying to access the labor market, trying to access skills training, they're not starting with the question of, I need to get a green job, right? They're starting with a more general question of, is my family going to allow me to enter the labor market? What age am I getting married at? Can I get transport from my home to a skills training center? All of these kinds of more general questions that actually have very little to do with the green economy. So I think we have to start with kind of having a much broader perspective, which brings me to my second point, which is really just an elaboration of the first one. So we tend to analyze labor markets in silos. I do this too. I look at the impact of technology, the impact of climate change, the impact of the energy transition, the impact of trade shocks. And then we also look at their solutions separately, right? What do we need to do for technology? Oh, digital skills. What do we need to do for trade shocks? Create more access to markets, and so on. But actually, that's not how the real world operates. Workers don't see it that way. For them, these forces combine and compound, and the impact shows up in their wages and their working conditions and whether they have jobs available at all. And from a public architecture perspective, it also doesn't matter whether we're talking about a green job or whether we're talking about trade shocks or whether we're talking about a job loss because of technology and automation. What we need is to build an effective architecture that transitions workers from one sector to another, particularly in this time of intense change. In this day and age, workers are not just going to go from fossils to renewables, right? Like, I'm oversimplifying, but they're not just going to change occupations once. Chances are they're going to have to change occupations multiple times. And so what it comes down to is not just skilling them very technically for one job, but ensuring that our skill system is agile enough to change with changing labor markets and to make sure that workers have the requisite levels of education and transitional skills and transferable skills to go from one occupation to the other. This is really particularly important because not only do we need workers and institutions to be more agile, but we also know that the more we fragment, the more we say, let's treat green skills and green jobs differently than tech jobs and tech skills differently and trade skills and trade jobs and entrepreneurship, and the more we fragment, the more things are likely to fall between the cracks. So I'll stop there with just clarifying what I'm trying to say a little bit more and summarize. So the report includes all of the facts, it includes all of the right recommendations, but I think there is a thinking shift that needs to happen across all of us working on these different areas. And that is that we are out here batting for a state green skills mission, right? But really that just adds more fragmentation to the system. What we need is a stronger state skills system that institutes mechanisms whereby ITIs adopt curriculums that respond to changing labor market needs. And if that means that we need to focus more on solar manufacturing, maintenance, installation jobs, then yes. If that means that we're focusing on EVs as part of the broader ITI ecosystem, sure. But the focus of the recommendations needs to be more broadly on the architecture of the entitlements and the skills training system, and not be out there batting for just the green skills part of it, because that actually creates more fragmentation. I'll just make two more quick points and then I'll stop. Fundamental to women's experience of the labor market, whether it's in green jobs or any other job, or access to skills, whether it's green skills or any other skills, is the community engagement part of this, is the access to transportation, is the access to what Sona was just talking about as well, is childcare. It's all of these ecosystem factors, right? So when we're talking about improve access to skills, because there's a skills gap, we need to improve access to all skills for women in general, access to skills training. Improve access, there's a jobs gap. It's not just in green jobs. There's a jobs gap for women in all jobs. We talk about improving access to opportunities to create and scale enterprises. We'll talk more about that later, but that's because there's systemic barriers, not just in green entrepreneurship, but all entrepreneurship. When we talk about building the supportive ecosystem, which includes access to transport, safe conditions, childcare, and community awareness, this creates a broader ecosystem, a broader economy that works for women. And I'll just end with what Jochen, I hope I said your name correctly, the director of the Heinrich Böll Foundation said, which is that economic transitions are never neutral, right? And that is why we need to have a broader systemic approach to improving conditions for women in skills and access to jobs and entrepreneurship in general, rather than trying to silo these systems even further into green jobs, green skills, etc.
So I'll just stop there. I have a lot more to say, and I can illustrate it with lots of examples. Just Jobs has an MOU with the Odisha government working on skill systems broadly, which includes the green component as well as other things. But maybe I'll get a chance later. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think I completely agree with all your points which you have highlighted. And when it comes to ITI's curriculum content and standardization of such segments or such sectors, what we also found out from ITI is there are very piecemeal bridge courses when it comes to solar and renewables and all of that. But the department still is thinking on building proper curriculum for the ITIs. I was recently last week in Maharashtra, and the same gap was there as well. I had a discussion with Director DVET Maharashtra, and Madam reflected that now we have created one course, a full-fledged course, which will be operational in all ITIs across Maharashtra. So yes, there's a huge gap from the supply side, which is the curriculum content courses, but also from the participation. I'm getting back to the question from the participation retention point of view. We saw only 2% women in Odisha were enrolled in the green jobs, and that too in the electrical as electricians, which is a traditional job role, or we can say which is a traditional course. And those women can go into any electrical company, they can go to solar, they can go to EV. That is the only job role wherein we saw participation of the woman, but that too very minuscule when it comes to comparison to the male counterparts. So yes, very important. We don't need to fragment it into different sectors and segments when it comes to women inclusion. Very important to have it as a holistic sector from the institutional governance point of view. Those are the incentives which government need to put in place. Thank you so much. I now move on to Kamya Chaudhary. This is primarily on the financing. It's a question which is related to finance. Now, for example, what mechanisms should we have in place which will be most effective in enabling this sector to scale, to be sustainable? And with that, could you share examples of any successful models or initiatives that have worked or enabled women to thrive in the energy entrepreneurs in India? We have seen certain examples such as Kusum and all of that, but we want to hear from your side. What are those models and incentives, and of course, any good examples?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. And, when I was reading the report, I think what really stayed with me was this strong emphasis on intersectionality. So I'm so happy that you've done that analysis with such depth. It's really valuable. I'm so glad that it exists. So thank you so much. You made my weekend brighter by giving me something excellent to go over. Today in my comments, I'd like to focus on the fact that very much picking up on what's already been said. It's the constraint is rarely women's interest in green work, but it's pretty much the way capability and capital, the labor markets, culture are structured. And it's this idea, this underscores this challenge that moving from participation to durable pathways, where skills translate into jobs and enterprise, that I want to emphasize should be able to survive shocks and exist at scale is really important moving forward. Since the question was about finance, I would really like to talk about how the finance architecture itself determines, which green skills become livelihood. And part of that is making sure that there is enough investment happening. And, where will investment come from in an era of austerity, in an era of excessive geopolitics shaping how climate finance moves or international climate finance flows. So one of the things that's been really valuable in evidence-based is blended finance. It can help rebalance risk return for women-led businesses and often focuses on de-risking and mobilizing capital. So whether that's through loans, bonds, or debt sharing, but it works well when paired with advisory and technical assistance. So I really do want to emphasize it cannot be just throwing green finance into a void. Unless it's capability focused, the returns are really low, and there's a chance of creating indebtedness and creating a bad circle when it comes to women being able to take advantage of it. And climate finance internationally, I just want to say, coming from Chatham House, in the environment that we're in today, I mean, the numbers were already pretty low of integrating climate finance. So you would see that OECD has done research on overseas development assistance flows. So of course, integrating gender equality numbers rose, may not be the same in the next report that they launch. However, gender equality as a principal objective remains quite minimal within the ODA percentage overall. So I just want to say internationally, this is not just an India problem. This is a global issue where governments and providers of ODA aren't able to imagine why specialized investment in women is critical and necessary. So something I just want to say is like, based on the organizer's question, it's really important to distinguish how finance can be made better. And, we need to look for examples globally, not just in India. And one way is to make sure you expand affordable capital or concessional capital. You reduce this perceived risk or real risk that's around it so that women are seen as bankable, investable folks, and create a more predictable demand around it. And just to emphasize, we have direct lending is seen to be a really effective tool. So something that's earmarked for women-owned or MSMEs or businesses. It's effective, but again, it needs to be paired with operational changes. That's when we see it really working out. So that means underwriting without land collateral as a requirement, having flexible repayment options that are aligned with cash flows for the women beneficiaries, and relationship-based distribution, something that's, maybe funded with, of course, technical assistance. And credit guarantees, unfortunately, as they stand today, really matter for women, but tend to be extremely exclusionary because, you require excessively formal land assets. And we know land ownership in India is very male dominant. You often need a long credit history with the bank that you're working with, or sectoral familiarity, which becomes harder if sectors have been male dominated and women are stepping into the space or being welcomed into the space. An example that I'd like to highlight here of what this could look like, because it's really important to see things working on the ground, is the British International Investments Dhan Shakti initiative, which they launched, which is a collateral-free loan product that has much lower fees, and it's designed exactly to address these kinds of barriers faced by women-led SMEs. And the borrowers' numbers have grown in this initiative by 60% between 2023 and 2024, which is great to see that women are taking it, and word of mouth and advertising and local investment and capability building has paid off. And the second thing I'd like to highlight as a useful government level benefit is procurement. It's a really great finance mechanism that makes sure that you're creating bankability without adding debt and really unlocking working capital finance. And this is being used across India as a policy lever. So you have public procurement policies for MSEs that set up an annual procurement target that includes women-owned. So it's not something new. We're not reinventing the wheel. These are things that already exist. And, I just also want to bring into this an example that's quite important from institutional finance within climate. And I think women workers and entrepreneurs in the green economy, once they're in the green economy, will be, or in any parts of the economy, will be facing excessive climate change-based risks. And that risk can be quite disproportional, as we've seen in research. Women, especially women in poverty, women in SC/ST backgrounds, are more likely to face the negative impacts of climate change, are more likely to be on the front lines. And an example that's quite useful that targets just this specifically is SEVA, in collaboration with Swiss Re, launched a heat wave microinsurance initiative for low-income women in India. And the idea is, and this was started in 2023, and the idea was, as soon as extreme heat is present in the country, using a parametric index that gets automatically triggered, women are given payouts to cover the loss of their daily wages in the area. And I think that's something that's quite important when we think about creating an environment, a climate finance environment that enables women's entrepreneurship and green transition. And yeah, just to say, I feel no just transition or green transition can be viable if you leave half the population behind. To be effective, fast, and efficient, women must be included, and that investment needs to be reflected in the retention policies as well. And this isn't a moral argument that we're putting together. This is an economic argument that if India wants to grow, and if India wants to grow at the pace that it has set its ambitions at, then it will need to include women in that. And yeah, just to again double down on the fact that retention is really important. So this means again leveraging policies in India that already exist to ensure childcare support exists on space, anti-harassment compliance and protections are there, as well as ways to ensure safe transport, because culture is a really important thing. And lastly, I just want to highlight in terms of barrier, having worked with many members of government, one thing that is quite difficult is we often imagine that everyone's already on board with the aim to bring more women in, but often this comes from a more patronizing approach rather than understanding the data, and again understanding the fact that this is an economic principle that will give multi benefits in the future. There is a lot of cultural issues with bureaucrats and politicians not fully understanding why women should be present in spaces, and because our ministries are existing in such silos, so you'll have the women in the Women Welfare Ministry very segregated from, say, the Agriculture or the Power Ministry. The mandates, the way the government's designed, often prevent a cross-sectional discussion and ensuring that the schemes reflect priorities across the board. So I just want to highlight it's also really important from a political will and policy design perspective to ensure that India's pre-existing women-focused policies that have given excellent results are integrated into their climate and green environment policies, because otherwise we fear replicating in this green transition and green economy the same inequalities that already existed in the previous cycle. So we have a real chance to do something differently. And lastly, again, from a Chatham House perspective, watching the critical minerals race happening at pace, at large, creating such panic. Odisha as a state will see a lot more investment internationally and domestically when it comes to mining and extraction. And it's going to be really important to make sure that women are at the forefront of ensuring that land and the environmental quality of the world that they live in is what they deserve, rather than having it to be a green extraction economy. So it's really important to also design policies that don't enable a minerals rush only, rather than actually developing and investing the area.
I'll have to stop you here. We'll continue on this because we already have questions on gender budgeting and all of that, which has worked very well in education sectors and all. But sorry, I'll have to stop you here.
Perfectly fine.
Quickly, I'm just adding to your point. I have worked on certain programs earlier. For example, one of the project I was with Skilling Ministry. It was called Village Engineers. So we took a kind of a graduation approach, not just skilling, but give them an asset. Once they are skilled, they need an asset to work upon. And then once they have the asset, if, for example, there was a mushroom cultivation, there was agribusiness, then they need the value chain ecosystem to have those products sell off in the market and all of that. So such kind of incentives have worked, the projects which I have worked on, because we are talking about skilling, we're talking about the entrepreneurs, particularly the green jobs and all of that. Another very good financial incentive is the skill impact bond, which has worked very well with, for example, NSDC and all of that. And particularly, it's a target for women, wherein money will be given from the funders only when they have a certain outcome in terms of participation, retention, and of course, the livelihood later. So I just wanted to add on those points that there are certain incentives which are working and need to be scaled up with, of course, the larger mandate of climate finance and all of that. That comes handy when it comes to financing such sectors. Thank you so much. We now move on to our another set of questions. We'll just repeat, and then later we have already many questions. I'll go back to Sona Mitraji, and the question which I want to ask you now is, as we have seen, there are major challenges in mobility, women mobility, given their care. You have already highlighted certain aspects on this. For example, caregiving responsibilities and then work, which hampers, of course, the mobility. So, considering that critical role of the care economy in providing resilience to communities, particularly during economic transitions as well as emergence of this whole green economy. The question is, how can just transition policies integrate care work to ensure equitable outcomes for women, especially their economic empowerment? This is the question which we discussed earlier, but some more nuances on this, if you may want to highlight.
Yeah. Thank you, Sohail. Thank you for the question. I think I'm going to just begin by reiterating the fact that, you know, any transition and what Sabina picked up, that any transition is not very easy. It is always very difficult for women. And in this transition which we are actually experiencing and witnessing, which is so fast and rapid, I think one of the things that I just want to keep reiterating is, for women, everything in the labor market, it starts from the inequality, because women are always looked upon as the primary caregivers, and which is one of the major reasons for which they have not been able to fully transition into accessing all the available jobs in the labor market. And we see these very strong occupational segregation trends, which we call as things, I mean, jobs that women do are always at the lower end of the value chains in any sector or segment. So while we understand that we need an approach which is comprehensive, holistic, which basically talks about barriers which are common to all sectors, but we also have to understand that all of these sectors have their own circumstances. All of these sectors have their own aspects which are very particular. For example, when we talk about green jobs, we have, and you yourself said the report also talks about it, it highlights it, in fact, that there is a predominance of on-site jobs in the green transition. And whereas when we talk about the digital economy, we actually find that a work from home is much more prevalent. So the needs of care is very different across these segments and these sectors, and the kinds of jobs that are created. So if we look at the kind of jobs that we are looking at, and I think one of the questions that I was looking at the Q&A box was asking that what are the kind of jobs that we are looking at when we say just transition. And I think the jobs are about engineers, technical specialists at higher levels, plant operators at mid-skill levels. And then we have a huge workforce whom are also a workforce that cannot work from home, that has to be present on site. We are talking about the installers, we are talking about the construction, the infrastructure development, and in that, building and embedding an entire care support system is very important. And that, again, is because the sheer fact that I started, that women are still looked upon as primary caregivers, and if that role is not facilitated, the transition will not be just. So we really need to embed a care system within the entire policy. I mean, care systems are now appearing as, okay, we talk about care economy as something that is profitable, non-profitable, different business models, everything is fine. But unless and until we understand this in the context of labor market and the labor market transitions, that how important the role of care economy is for women, we will not be able to transition into a we will not have a just transition. We'll again replicate these segregations. We'll again treat women within every sector as part-time flexible workforce. We will not be able to bring them into the mainstream of the newer jobs that are being created. And we'll not create those upward mobility channels, which are actually something that we talk about when we say that women have to aspire to move to higher jobs, move to the higher rungs of the value chain, higher rungs of the occupations that they are entering into. So while I agree with what Sabina says, that the skilling has to be adjusted to changes, rapid changes, that has to be complemented with the aspirations of women to rise. And that complementarity will only come when we have enabled and facilitated women on their care roles. It is not going to come without that. It is true for all the sectors that we are talking about.
Absolutely. I just have, while you were sharing your pointers, I had another good example. We had a program at Ministry of Skill by the name Yuva Youth program, and it was for the marginalized sections in Delhi. And the training was conducted in the police stations to give that safety kind of infrastructure to the women. And while I used to go for monitoring and all, there was very less attendance in the early morning hours in every one center of it. And what we finally did was we changed the timing. It was at 9 or something, and then we changed it to 10:30 or 11. The only reason was it was mostly married women with kids, having husbands at home, working, not working women, but mostly housewives and all, where we want to do some intervention for livelihood. Just changing the training timings, the attendance went very high. So that program was successful again with these women. So yes, very important to integrate what Sabina earlier mentioned and now what you added to that point. Yes.
Absolutely. I just have to add to what you said, that from a personal experience, I was just switching off and on my video because my daughter just returned from school, and I usually from 3:30 to 4 usually try not to have anything. But yeah, so that's changing the time is very important, because women work according to many timings that are not really the only 8 hour or 6 hour.
Absolutely.
Cohorts.
And I hope the gender roles and the socialization of it within the larger spectrum changes, but it might take time. Hence, we have to change the economy, the sector itself, to integrate it into that. I would now move on to Sabina again, and this is about the self-help groups. For example, we have Mission Shakti in Odisha, and other women-led collectives, initiatives, which are working on this transition from low-value enterprises. So the question is, this is again a kind of, I would say, it has been created a structure that self-help group is something very good. Women are part of self-help groups. They are a member of it. They are doing something great. But when you visit the self-help groups, we have visited extensively in these areas where self-help groups are very prominent. But mostly, again, we saw they were working for some other person. They were just part of the value chain, and they were just producing what was the final service or the product of that particular woman self-help group. So we asked them, what would take it further if you want to take the green entrepreneurship, want to build it and scale it. Of course, the report does mention about concessional loans, funding, any other incentives, value chain, ecosystem support, and all of that. My question to you is relevant to that only, that how do we make it more climate resilient, build these value chains into the circular economy or the renewable energy itself? And what would it take to take these self-help groups from that niche, or what we call as something great, from that great to the greatness, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sohail. And if the participants in this webinar leave with one message from me, it's that we need to look at these things from a broader architectural perspective. So look at how we enable access for women into jobs, into skills training, into entrepreneurship. What are their needs and resources, and how do we create better pathways for them, rather than siloing them in different buckets. So that's kind of broadly my takeaway message. And I think that very much applies to the question that you just asked as well, which is, women in entrepreneurship, So I'll make 2 points with respect to that. First, let me just start with an overview of the data, right? So 24%, so roughly 1 in 4 enterprises in Odisha are female-run, only 1 in 4. Of these, 100% are micro. 99% of the female-run enterprises do not hire any workers. And wait, 53% engage in manufacturing activities, which sounds like a great thing, but what are the manufacturing activities? It's, wearing apparel, so basically tailoring food products and tobacco products, right? And 99% of these female-run enterprises are not registered, right? So many of these data points are things that you already bring out in your report, so I'm just reiterating them. And I'm reiterating them because, again, the challenge, this is my point number 1 for this segment, is that the challenge is enabling women's entrepreneurship in a more healthy way to begin with, right? They don't have, as Kamya mentioned, and as Sona also reiterated, like, women don't have access to finance. They face gender norms, which keep them out of labor markets and keep them out of a successful entrepreneurial activity. There's lots of things like transport, safety, childcare that prevent them from accessing markets. So if we are going to think about leveraging SHGs to strengthen women's entrepreneurial outcomes, we need to think about it, more broadly than just green-focused entrepreneurship, right? And once we strengthen the ecosystem in all of these different ways, then of course the green economy becomes a priority inevitably, because climate change, heat stress, energy transition are all upon us. So that's point number 1. The second point I wanted to specifically talk about is SHG groups. Like you mentioned, Sohail, that SHG groups are an excellent way of mobilizing women, but there's been in recent years, even the last couple of years, there's been this complete romanticization of SHGs, right? And the problem with that is that SHGs themselves have a lot of challenges. How are they governed? Are they stable, right? So they're an excellent way of mobilizing women and collectivizing them, but by themselves, SHGs don't lead to better entrepreneurship for women, right? We need to fix all of these other factors, and SHGs are one mechanism. Finally, I know I said I only had 2 points, but I'm going to say one more thing because this is very close to my heart, which is, we tend to look at the economy, skills training, architecture in macro ways. What are the green sectors? What's growing? How do we improve skills architecture nationwide? How many, 4.1% respondents have formal skills, etc. We can even look at these data at the state level, but I would argue that the way that these decisions are made are in local communities. And so I know iFOREST has done work on this in the past and has also sort of alluded to this in different parts of this report. But what we need to look at is very local ecosystems of what is available to women in terms of entrepreneurship, right? Is it LAC? Is it MOA? Is it, some other kind of resource? And then the green aspect is, tied to basically building local ecosystems that are more sustainable and environmentally conscious and so on, right? But we need to look at what is possible in a local context. What is possible in a local context before we can sort of think about, green entrepreneurship and what that means. I'll stop there. I hope that was.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sohail.
No, absolutely. I think place-based mechanisms, incentives, understanding those, I think we have to contextualize. Yeah. Sorry. There was some other question from Shrestha. So what I was mentioning is, yes, place-based mechanisms are very important. Contextualizing, understanding the context of each and every economy becomes very important, even if we want to scale or make women part of the larger economy or the larger industry, whether it is green or any other traditional sector. So that's very important from all aspects. Until unless we don't localize it, the issues of migration, the issues of mobility will be there forever. Hence, it's important to have that place-based research, then understand what are those markets which can be developed across segments, not just green. So yeah, I completely agree on those points, and these are very useful points for us to take further in the report, maybe in the next report, or if we get a chance to reflect back. So my last question, before we have this last question with Kamya, we'll take the questions from the participants. We'll hardly take 5 minutes on that. And with that, Abhishek, please let me also know if I am moving beyond time so that we are restricting ourselves to 1.5 hours of this webinar. My last question
sorry to intervene here. Our fourth panelist is also here, so please do engage.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I Shubhanga Kishore Dasji has also joined us, who's the Deputy Director with World Skill Center. It's one of the very important and doing very good work when it comes to skilling and doing something advanced, not just the traditional skilling programs, what is happening in Odisha. Sir, welcome for joining us. You were busy in other meeting, but thank you for taking time again and joining us today. Before we move to last question to Kamya, I would quickly have one question with Sir. Sir, we were also discussing about the skilling, the skill program, the skill mission, which we have also recommended in our program, in our report. My question to you, sir, is what should be the design features of a gender-responsive state green skills mission in Odisha? And for that, what are the key institutional coordination and partnerships which are crucial for launching such gender-responsive green skilling programs? Of course, we have gone through all the reports from Odisha government, SDET and all of that, but we want to understand from your side, what are those critical areas which will make it successful from the institutional point of view, from the supply side point of view?
Good evening, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Yeah.
So sorry for the joining late because I was stuck up in another meeting. So
no problem.
Thank you for inviting me as a panelist in this crucial discussion. So as I understand, this is basically to formulate policies which will promote the women participation in the green skill job sectors. Am I correct in saying this? Yeah, actually you're on mute, Mr. Sohail.
Go ahead, please. Yes. The larger mandate is yes, making the ecosystem, whether it will take policy, it will take incentives, it will take curriculum content, or changing the skilling governance ecosystem.
Yeah, let me just give a perspective of World Skill Center and what we do here. Basically, World Skill Center is an advanced skill training institute established by the government of Odisha in collaboration with ITA Singapore. So the objective is to bridge the gap, the skill gap, which is required by the industry and the students which being produced from the different vocational institutions. Because the industries often say that we are having jobs, but we are not getting the right candidate to appoint. So that this is an effort which to minimize this gap, and that's why the courses that we run here are mostly industry oriented courses, and we have a curriculum of 80-20, 80% practical and 20% theory. Now coming to the topic, as far as Odisha government is concerned, we are very much concerned about the participation of women in the scaling sector, because traditionally, if we think of skill training institutes in Odisha, 3 years back, only 5% participation of girls were there, but now it has increased up to 35%. So within the span of 3 years, it has gone from 5% to 35%. Now I'll tell you the crux of the story. So initially, when we assessed why the girls are not participating in the skill training institutes, so the answer from most of the parents was the training that you are giving in the institutes are mostly male-dominated trainings, like fitter, electricians. So we tried to convince the parents through various means that now skills is gender neutral. A girl can very well serve as an electrician as equally as boys. Now, over a period of 3 years, uh, I'll like to quote a success story of World Skill Center. Now, a girl from Nuapada district, which is one of the backward most districts of the state, she did her ITI from the Nuapada ITI, then got into World Skill Center for the 1 year training program, and from here, since last 2 years, she is in Dubai, and she's doing a facility maintenance job, which includes electrician, which includes plumbing, which includes maintenance of CCTV, because she has done all these practicals when she was studying here. Now, in the context of green jobs, the same logic can go on. Basically, we need to convince a girl that this is not only a boy's job, this is also a girl's job. So for this, first we need to analyze the barriers. Mainly, as far as I am concerned, I foresee three main barriers. First is the social norms and the gender exceptions, which I narrated. There is a myth that these are male-dominated trades. These trades cannot be done by female candidates. So that myth has to go. Second is the skill gap and access to skill training. That means we have to make, because most of the girls who are in the skill training are predominantly from the bottom of the pyramid of the society. So we need to make skills accessible to them so that they can pursue skill training. So that's what in that aspect also Odisha government has been very kind to exempt all the girl students from fees who gets admitted into diplomas and ITI colleges. So that's how we increase the girls in enrollment in the skill training. And third
Sure,
thing is
sir.
this.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
please. Sorry.
Yeah. And the third barrier was the structural and institutional barriers, which often exist in the minds of the people who governs the institutes. See, for example, if you go to a institute which is not concerned about girls training, he or she will uh, persuade the girl to take sewing machine operator training or some computer training. She will not get allow the girls to enter into a hard trade, which is not actually the picture. Because I tell you one fact, in one of our ITIs in Barampur, the Tata Advanced Services of Hyderabad, they had come and recruited 30 girls. And subsequent year also they came and recruited girls. And the feedback was the girl students were much more productive than the boys because of their concentration, because of their preciseness. So they were more productive for them. So nobody had tested them earlier. So that is where we need to create awareness from the industry side also, that you have to test some girl students. So like in if I come to the green jobs, so say for fitting of the solar panels. Now predominantly any company will say that this is a job which can be done only by boys, but we have to make them aware that no, it can also be done by the girls, because our girls passing from ITIs are climbing the 33 kVA line and connecting the line. So nothing is impossible. So that is where both side has to be sensitized. The girl has to be sensitized that yes, you can do it, and the industry side who is taking them has to be sensitized to accept that yes, a girl can do that. So these are the two main aspects which we need to, and it will not happen one day. There has to be a sustained effort in doing this. And finally, we have to look at the demographic also, because predominantly we are a agrarian society where 70% of the women are in the villages, more than 70%. So we also need to think about them, how they will have gainful entry into this green job sector. So we have to find out how to engage them in the green jobs like biogas. There has to be a systematic approach in villages, in panchayats, of uh, generating entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs specifically, who will venture into this biogas generation, or any local product that relates to the uh, green job sector skills. So that these things also should be looked into. So that's what is my submission for the panelists.
Thank, thank you, sir. Thank you for these insights. And what we have also seen from the student surveys across ITIs, counseling is very important because not
Yes.
just women, but in general, men, male, female, both does not know much about this sector. And women particularly suffer because there's a huge information asymmetry, then barriers, as you rightly mentioned. So that's where institutions such as yours and ITIs, where the larger chunk of population goes because the fee is little less, accessibility is higher because every district has one or two or three, I think, ITIs. And that counseling part, information part, and then making people aware of this sector and making them confident, motivation, giving them that motivation becomes very important. But that is something which is lacking right now across ITIs. I have visited Odisha, I have visited Maharashtra. That needs to be taken into consideration. And last part, what after skills? There was another question, but we can have the deliberation upon it while we are talking. The placement linkages. Very important to have placement linkages if we give that surety to the students, particularly for women, and their parents can see, okay, a woman who's empowered, who's skilled, goes to a labor market, gets a good salary, is empowered, and that mechanism has to be built for each and every institution in our country.
Yes, exactly.
Largely, we are going towards the quantity numbers, how many women participated. We saw this problem in our primary schooling as well, in our elementary schooling as well. Our GRE, gross enrollment ratio, is very high. It shows a very good rosy picture that 100% GRE in our primary schooling, elementary schooling. But when it comes to net enrollment, the retention, the dropout is very high, is immense. So we need to have those mechanisms in place. I would stop here with our questions, deliberations with our esteemed panelists today. We'll go back to the question board, and we have few questions, I think. So do you want to take them with the concerned panelists, or I continue with it? If
Yeah,
you
you
have
can
got
go
the
ahead.
question.
How much time we have? Are we
I
clear?
think we are
Yeah.
past 6 minutes already. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it okay if I answer the gender budgeting one just because I have to head off into another meeting? So I don't want to.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I asked it actually. It would be
Oh,
great.
okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just from our experience doing research, in my previous role, I was working with the Grantham Research Institute at LSE, and we were working with ministries of finance across the globe to understand how they're integrating gender in climate finance work. And one of the things we found was like gender budgeting is a really excellent entry point to convince governments that gender is of value in climate policies. It was the easiest way to get them on board, to get them around the table, to get them to agree, to get them to make commitments. So I just want to say the power of it is it's a great allure, it's great marketing. It's worked really well, and we thank our predecessors and all the excellent work that's happened over the decades for that. However, it is one of the tools within the toolkit. It has some limits. Ways we've seen that and just for people who are not aware of what gender budgeting is, it isn't budgeting separately for gender projects, but ensuring there's a system across government spending and tracking that, making sure that it meets different needs and realities, and tracking spending around this for equitable outcomes. So great, promising success stories come from Bangladesh, Mexico, Rwanda, where gender responsive frameworks across ministries have delivered some excellent work. In terms of, and India has also been doing a gender budget statement, at least, as part of our union budget. In the global north, I'd like to highlight Austria and Canada have done some exceptional work. Canada is one of the few countries with a feminist finance policy for across the country. And they have a gender-based results framework, which guides all discussions in federal level and budget discussions. And they call it the Gender-Based Analysis Plus Review. So some of the benefits of gender budgeting is you allow targeted spending effectively, making sure your subsidies are reaching women across the board. It improves accountability because you have to register where it's being spent. So there's more transparency on how public funding is going towards gender equity goals. It also encourages departments to design programs with gender outcomes in mind. So very much like we were talking about skills or childcare, it makes sure that governments think that way. And if you know you're being evaluated on something, I think Indian states respond really well to rankings. So when Niti Aayog is like, we're going to rank states across X metric, governments really step up. So similarly, states would respond quite well if they know they're being evaluated on this. And it really does prevent some of the silos we were talking about. So rather than being one department's responsibility, it's more of a whole of government approach. You're institutionalizing it as a way of process. Having said that, there are some challenges. Implementation can be really uneven because there's such a shortage of gender disaggregated data. So budgets can include gender tags, but lack actual enforcement or evaluation of outcomes, which means you can say we've set X money aside to spend in the budget, but did you ever spend it? What happened because of it? What changes happened? Like that type of measurement is really, really difficult. And this shortage of data really changes how we understand impact. And it's definitely across specifically within global south, there is less participation of public as well, which means that if you're creating gender budgeting, there's less participatory budgeting. So whether there's consultations or gender-focused impact assessments where underrepresented minorities get a way to feed back into this really top-down approach. And that's something we see as a practice happening more in global north. And politically, gender budgets are extremely fragile, which means they really depend on the fact if there's international funding, if there are domestic champions, gender budgets aren't binding, they are simply a tracking mechanism. So you can have these fiscal constraints or political context shaping how well a country does versus how well it doesn't. So for example, United States in this economy, with the way they're looking at gender in such a politically hostile way, means they're going to be doing really little on this, both domestically and internationally. So overall, I think it only works if it's institutionalized and not just a checkbox exercise. It needs to be linked to policy design backed by really good data and capacity building to collect this data at such scale, and then to use this data to track outcomes, making sure that you're measuring employment, income, access to service, and then resilience that's created. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I think that's very important. We need to have targeted approach when it comes to gender budgeting. And for that, we need to have gender disaggregated data, which is a very big challenge in our country. So completely agree on both the points on those. And thank you so much for joining us today. I think you have a hard stop, so it's you can exit from the
day. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you so much. And do we have any other question for panelists? There are a few questions on what is.
Kindly answered all of the questions in the chat box. I think we can move on to Shrestha to close the session by putting some closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks,
Suhail,
and thank you everyone. I know some of you, I read your work, and it's a pleasure listening in. I personally think, and for all the participants, will definitely respond if any questions are missed by email. So, and all the reports, research, everything are in public domain. And yeah, I personally think, it's a big work. My concern always about gender transitions. In fact, the discussion on gender in everything right now. And I was at a meeting day before, and my biggest concern has always been it should not be a tokenism. So whatever we do, I personally feel it should be institutionalized. That's something to really push for, and have clear mechanisms to monitor and report on, because that's what will, I think, will move the needle. Otherwise, these are discussions, this is thoughtfulness, but I am sometimes, I'm really must say, I'm very scared about the fact that everywhere there today is a gender word, which is somewhere there without, and it is almost becoming a tokenism. And I honestly feel that we really should not slip that way and make it more effective. Like the word in 1990s, it was like sustainable development. Everyone started using it, and without really really knowing what it is. And I personally believe that is where many of these things can lead to, if we really don't institutionalize processes, have accountability built in, mechanisms to be monitored. Otherwise, these things doesn't work. But thank you so much all for joining. I would love to keep the conversations going offline as well. And it's a pleasure to have you all. Thank you very much, Sukhri. Thank you, Sukhri. Yeah. And thank you, everyone.